All right, good morning. We are going to start taking a look at how do we deal with rational exponents. So at this time, it's kind of like sort of understood that you're pretty competent with multiplying and dividing with exponents, and just kind of understanding, when you multiply, you add your exponents. When you divide, you subtract them. You've had some practice with doing that with negative exponents. And then you're also proficient with working with the powers of a power. So when you're taking something that has an exponent and raising it to an exponent. And so like the different things we do with that. So that's kind of a prerequisite to sort of understanding what we're going over here. So when we talk about a rational exponent, we're talking about any kind of an exponent that's not an integer. All right, so in other words, that means things like, fractions and decimals. And we're not going to really talk about decimal exponents today. We're going to pretty much concentrate on fractions. So you won't have to worry about that, but the way you would do that is you would turn it into a fraction and then you would deal with it. So let's take a look at this. Let's just dive right in. All right. So it says, first of all, the main thing we got to do is we got to talk about square roots, and we haven't done a lot of square roots up to this point. So the idea of a square root is that if you take any number, so I'm going to take the number 64, and you're going to see some of these I take. If I take any number and I take its square root, what that means is I'm looking for the number that if I multiply it by itself, it will give me this number under, we call this a radical sign, right? This is called a radical sign. It will give me that number that's under the radical sign. And the reason this is because if you think of, if I have a square and its area is 64, right? So its area is 64 units. What's the side length? And if you think of the properties of a square, well, it's what you multiply, your side line, you square your side length together, and that gives you your area. So what we're doing is we're kind of reversing that. So we're saying, what's the side length of a square with the area of 64? And if you did that, you would say, oh, it's 8, right? Because 8 times 8 is 64. And so what we do is we call numbers that work neatly like this, we call those perfect squares. Right? And so if you think about your multiplication chart, all your perfect squares are numbers like 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, and so on, right? And it goes up infinitely. It's probably a good idea to start learning those and knowing those maybe, up to at least 15 or 20, okay? Because you'll use them. But those are called perfect squares, and the thing is, we deal with a lot of things in math that aren't perfect squares. So you'll have something where it's like, oh, the square root of 24, and we'll talk about how to deal with that in the next lesson. But for now, all you need to know is that if it's not a perfect square, it's okay to just leave it under this radical sign, and we'll deal with it. So that's what a square root is, and then we'll talk about other kinds of roots. But a root is just what you multiply by itself, the number of times the root tells you. And square roots, they don't write the number there, but you kind of imply that there's a 2 here, all right, next to the radical sign. So that's sort of where we're at with that. Okay, so now that we've talked about that, let's see here. I think what I'll do is I'm going to stop the video, and then we'll pick up.